Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of Outdoor Hospitality Weekly. I'm Alex Burkett, joined as always by Matt Whittemore. And Matt, we got a lot of stories to talk through today after a week hiatus, mainly on me for getting campground open here in Michigan. Although it's April and most parks are kind of just now getting going as we're getting into May, especially in the Northeast and the Midwest. It was, I would say, a busier opening weekend than what I expected. At least for us, it was our best weekend since Grayson purchased the property in our 4 years of ownership. And at least here in Michigan, people are back RVing, even though the weather has been crappy. So nice to see customers again and get people out to the park. And yeah, just excited to be back, finally doing an episode in camping season. Before we dive into the news, how are things with you?
Pretty good, pretty good. How was opening week? Did it go off without a hitch?
I would say almost. Obviously, you have startup maintenance things that always seem to get in the way, and the weather certainly has not helped us. Although I have some, sun coming across me today as we're recording this. The weather has. It's been a little bit crazy to tell you the truth. We have a 7 acre fishing lake on the property that I actually oversee out of this building here, and it was at one of the lowest levels that we had seen in years heading into the off season. The lake is basically overflowing at this point because of how much rain we've had. So it has been a very very wet spring. But yeah, beyond that and some of the maintenance things that we've had, it's been great. Had a fantastic weekend with customers. Did a little bit of a late Easter celebration, which is always fun. And had some amazing, great 5-star reviews from this weekend. So overall, nice start to the year, and looking forward to everything to come.
Yeah. Did you get this cold front that came through? We had a couple 20-degree nights the last couple nights. We actually got some snow in Syracuse
Yeah, I
yesterday.
was I was grabbing groceries last night, and same thing. It was snowing, and I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" For almost approached freezing overnight, but back up into the 50s today. So, at least the weather's starting to hold out. I hope for the next couple weeks. The
I
grass
love
needs
it.
the grass needs mowed. I'll say that. So it's
Yeah.
hard to get out and do that kind of work when it's raining almost every other day.
Yeah, I'm with you. Well, congrats. Good work on an opening there. It's always an adventure, always something new, different. It's the life of a campground operator, right? As off season goes by in the blink of an eye, and you're saying it's opening day again, and
Exactly. You work all off season to get everything ready, and especially for a lot of our customers, we have I've talked before, we have a nice mix of long-term and transient customers, and a lot of my long-term guests coming back were just so incredibly impressed with the updates and the upgrades that we've been doing and all of the new things that took me hours and hours this off season to put together. So it's always nice to see that hard work begin to pay off and for everybody to go, oh my goodness, you guys really did a lot this off season. So hearing those kind of comments are great, and it makes all the hard work worth it to see everybody come back and see the park in much better
yeah,
form. So yeah, should be a great season for us. Very much pacing well at a micro level with our individual property, but we are going to dive into some data today and talk through some different stories happening in the industry, much more on a macro level, and pick apart some a little bit of acquisitions news, a little bit of industry data, both in our market and the RV industry, and just talk through that. So, Matt, why don't we kick it off with some reporting that was, or reports, I should say, that these have become annual staples in our industry. Campgrounds of America, KOA, released their Camping and Outdoor Hospitality Report for 2026. This is conducted in combination with Scott Barr over at Crane Consulting Group. Really, great guy and somebody who puts together a lot of amazing industry data. This has again been an annual staple for KOA, I think, for I don't know if it's quite a decade, but might be that long. I mean, we're probably going on 10 years of data at this point that they have. And Campspot announced their reservation system in the industry. Their data dig Q1 report was also announced this week. So just in the last couple of weeks, a lot of good data looking at Q1 coming out. Matt, I'll sort of put this up to you first. Any interesting insights that came out from this report that are good to start our discussion?
I don't think anything super surprising, but some good data, right? It seems like we're normalizing. You look at the trends, right? You look at what I love about the KOA report is they put everything mostly in 10-year trends, and it
And in
gives you
sections.
Yeah, it gives you right. So we just got the overview so far. I think this year they're still doing the. Are they still doing the sections? Yeah, I think so. Right.
Correct. Yes, and
Yeah.
then they have in the past as well, kind of broken out like glamping data as well. I think
Exactly.
right, looking at like Terramore and stuff like that, trying to really
Right.
zero that in.
So this is build the overview. So I expect those 10 or so other sections to come out. And I think they kind of do like weekly releases, and I think it's encouraging in some ways that camping households are holding pretty strong. A slight dip in some of the data in terms of number of people actually getting out and going camping, but still a really strong number, right? We're looking at, um,
It's
you know,
still 100 million or right about that kind of figure, I
yeah,
believe. Correct.
yeah. Well, so on the households, it's 52 and a half. Like 2024 was 52 and a half million. 2023 was almost 54 million. This year was just over 52 million. So it's dipping a little bit, but it's still a strong industry. I think the demographics are changing. I think that's kind of an old story. We all know that in the industry that boomers are aging out, campers are getting younger, behaviors are changing because the millennial camper and even younger than millennials, they have different wants and needs than baby boomer campers. Uh, I definitely see kind of this return to nature. Glamping is still strong. Really, that's where you see a lot of the growth in this industry. Such a small little sliver of the outdoor hospitality niche when you look at number of rooms and number of locations. So I still anticipate a ton of growth in lodging and glamping, right? Outdoor lodging, cabins.
Yeah, and I
You
think I
know,
read, Matt, too, 1 in 3 campers since 2020 is new. Speaking to that point of that
yeah,
like generational shift coming about, like that's a very healthy number in the last 6 years to think that, 30% of your customers might be brand new to visit your property. That's a really encouraging sign just
yeah,
from a marketing perspective as well.
right. One of the things that was not so encouraging, but I think is to be expected, is the share of leisure trips. We've seen a steady decline there, right? In the heat of COVID 2021, 40% of leisure trips were camping. And in 2025, they reported that 23% of leisure trips were camping. So that's gone from 40% to 32 to 27 to 24 to 23. So I think we're getting back to a normal level. I think that's still a healthy percentage. Um,
What I wonder too, though, Matt, with that, and I've always kind of looked at that, and as you said, you see kind of that steady decline. I'd be curious to see, like, does that mean that people are just traveling more in general, just in the travel industry, and that as that percentage grows, camping is just taking a smaller share, right? Are people taking more trips to resorts and going on cruises and flying on airlines and all of that? And again, camping remains strong and healthy, and you're seeing that gap grow between the, camping stays that are very affordable for an average American household and then maybe the upper end of those trips and people taking those more luxury vacations a little bit more often. Like what if the overall sample size has grown and our share has just shrunk a little bit, that might actually mean that it's still very, very healthy and that again we're just taking a smaller share of a growing travel industry.
yeah, well said. Um, a decline in RV ownership as well, which is going to tie into some of our later stories, kind of tangentially or indirectly on the RV manufacturing and parts and components side of the business. Um, Down from the peak in 2022 was 15.2 million RV owners. And in 2025, it was down under 10 million, 9.91 million, which is a
Wow.
significant decline. It's been a pretty steady decline. In 2024, it was 9.98 million, and so that's you're looking at over a third drop since its peak. And yeah, well, that'll tie directly into what we talk about in a few minutes here. Interesting tidbit here was that, um, right, looking at who RV owners are and who RV buyers are, KOA found that 80% of the RV owners in 2025 bought theirs for the primary purpose of camping, and that's up from 72% in 2024. So seems like casual kind of trial RV buyers have washed out, and we're left with like a harder core, more devoted camping customer,
Uh-huh.
which, pros and cons to that. But I think we have a committed base, and I think what always has, there's a lot of noise in all this data. I think this is really good data. Again, shout out to Scott Barr and at Karen Consulting, and KOA, obviously industry leader. I had the chance to connect with Scott a few weeks back. We're going to try and get him on the podcast in the next few weeks, and I know he puts a ton of work into this report. He has the best data in the industry, and I know he takes a lot of care in this. So I don't mean to say that Scott is putting out noise by any means, but there's just a lot of opinions floating out in the industry. There's a lot of leading indicators, trailing indicators. It's really hard to just kind of cut through the noise and like see it for what it is. And I think we try to do that.
Well, and
There's a healthy base here.
yeah, and I
I
was gonna
think
say, I
there's a
think
behavioral.
it's hard to find what that new normal is, Matt. Like what,
Yeah,
like as you said, it's you get indicators from all the different sides, and it's like, well, are we finally back at like a pre-COVID 2020 level? Like, what is new normal? I think people, have a lot of opinions on what that is, and everybody's seeing different things. Like, I have anecdotal data that points to some of these things of what's happening here, but we're a small, less than 200 site park in Michigan, right? Like, this is not going to be a representative sample of what's happening around the country. So,
for sure. And I say it all the time, right? Oh, it's normalization from COVID, and there's a lot of truth to that. But I think that's also, and I'm guilty of it. I think that's a pretty lazy simplification of what's happening. There's a new consumer,
it's a
and
shift.
right, it's not back. The numbers are returning to what appears to be what was in 2019, but it's a completely different industry than what it was in 2019. Like, yeah, camping is camping, and I think some of the beauty of our industry is that it's like a return to the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, right? Go outside, climb a tree, get dirty in the woods, which is amazing. What I love about our industry, and there will always be that in the industry, but you can't ignore the fact that the consumer is completely different. The just even sitting and watching, taking a road trip and looking on the highway, like the flavor of camper that passes you on the highway is completely different than what was 5 years ago, right? There's all these new modern like A-frame pop-ups and all these cool new truck campers, right? Like I feel like truck campers went away and now they're back, and there's all these new modern expensive. Like I looked at before I bought my rooftop tent, I was looking at truck campers and I was like, I'm not spending 30 grand on a truck camper. Like, right? You can buy a really nice travel trailer, a 3, 4, 5 year old really nice travel trailer for 30 grand, for 15 grand even these days. And I'm going to go spend 30 grand on a truck camper, but it is really high quality and it's really cool. So it's just a different world. It's a modernizing world. It's a much younger consumer that has really different tastes in how they camp and where they camp. So, I think we've touched on it a lot throughout the life of this newsletter and this podcast, that it's changing. And I think I sometimes feel like I sound like a broken record, but it's just every single day in the industry, it becomes more and more apparent. So highly recommend, check out the KOA report. Always some good insights, and I particularly appreciate it for kind of the opportunity to like zoom out. Like you can zoom in on the data and you can get some really cool stuff, but I love the way they present it in a 10-year format in a lot of ways, and gives you an opportunity to kind of, you know, see the forest instead of the trees, so to speak. So, anything else on your mind on the KOA report, or should we jump into some of our news stories here?
Yeah, I'll add one thing quickly, and I'll just touch on the CampSpot Q1 data dig here
Yeah.
briefly. As kind of like I said, I'll pull some anecdotal data from us of what I saw during our opening weekend. So to give some a short background for us at our property, almost 70% of my campers last year were repeat guests who stayed with us more than one time throughout the summer. Obviously, an incredible number and something that we are incredibly grateful for. Opening weekend was a different story. For this year, I had a lot of new customers come in and visit us for the first time, partially due to a different strategy in marketing that we had, and partially in the way that we were able to market how we did that opening weekend. And what I was aiming for was we were really trying to drive occupancy for this opening period. And I think that this is matching, and the reason I bring this up, the strategy that I'm seeing in this CampSpot data and what I hear also anecdotally a lot of parks starting to take. So in this CampSpot Q1 data dig, which is a report that they put out, they've worked with Ojai on some of this stuff, trying to put out good data every quarter. They found that occupancy in Q1 is up 9% year over year. Well, at the same time, ADR is down 7%. So this is kind of the first data point that I've seen, and where I'm number one, it's sort of matching the approach that we're taking, and number two, it's the shift is different than what we've talked on this podcast for the last 6 months. You probably heard Matt or I both mention that ADR and rates are rising to try and match what was a very stagnating occupancy. And now it is interesting that obviously this is Q1. So looking at, okay, is that we're talking about January through March, we're not necessarily talking about this as we're getting into the summer season. So like,
Right.
is that bit of an occupancy gain that, like the Canadians were coming back down to Florida and Texas again, and that was like a mismatch in the jump there? Like, I'm not sure. I'm interested to see how this looks, and I'm interested to see if this trend holds, because, for us, our lodging has taken off, in Airbnb bookings for us have come back in spurts, something I didn't think I was ever going to say after, I've been hearing and seeing from ourselves that third-party Airbnb bookings in our cabins and lodging units were kind of on a slow decline. They've started to come back in spades, for us at least. Also highlighted in this that lodging and glamping sites are outperforming also in Q1, right at about 43% occupancy and about a $38 ADR. But we're matching that. My occupancy is up. I'm taking in more long-term workers like linemen and travel nurses and that kind of thing. And our ADR is down a little bit, but also my April revenue as a result of that is up, and it's at the highest level it's been in 4 years, right? So a little bit of anecdotal data there, but I think that this is I'm bookmarking this Q1 data to say, let's come back and look at this in Q2 and Q3. I'm interested to see how this holds and what the data looks like, over the season. But this is, it is very much on pace with what I am seeing and the strategy we're beginning to put in place here at Grayson at our park for this season. So just a note for operators of, if you're seeing that mix and your ADR is suffering a little bit, there may be some hope here if occupancy keeps up. So just something to keep a watch on with the data there.
Yeah, great point.
Okay, I think we've dated out for a minute. Let's switch gears here a little bit and touch on a little bit of acquisitions news and a little bit of hotel news first. So in episodes past, I'm going to run through this briefly because we've touched on this multiple times before, but there have been some major moves from hotel brands entering the outdoor hospitality space, including Marriott's acquisitions of Postcard Cabins and their partnership with Trailborn. Hilton, obviously, doing their little bit of a partnership or alliance with AutoCamp, and then Hyatt in Under Canvas. So, if we think about the big hotel brands, those are probably the three that have entered the space in a big way. But actually, yesterday, as we're recording this here, a story was announced on Woodall's that World Hotels launched what they are terming their Backdrop Luxury Glamping Collection. And this is a part of BWH Hotels, so Best Western. They have a few properties that they've kind of lumped into this initial mix in their glamping collection. Asheville River Cabins in Arden, North Carolina, the Lodge at Pico Bonito in Honduras, and then Zion Wildflower Resort that, Matt, I'll let you touch on that story because we're kind of pulling from, I think, a story we covered in another episode many months ago, and now it's kind of joining the fold again with the Zion Wildflower acquisition and Best Western. So, Matt, what does this tell you about like Best Western entering the space? How interesting is this? I'll just let you kind of take it and touch on this first.
Yeah, so they made some noise some months back, maybe even like close to a year ago, maybe, with the Zion Wildflower Resort. So we actually had the opportunity to connect with some people on the team over there.
That's right.
And, you know, I think a very deliberate entrance into the space. I'm really intrigued by the property in Honduras. I'm not an expert on Honduras, but, interesting kind of exotic kind of location.
Yeah, they're branding this as like global, right? And like expanding glamping beyond the US, which is something we really get to talk about.
Right. So it's interesting. It's under the World Hotels brand, which is under Best Western Hotels and Resorts. Interesting. We did touch on the French Broad River was it's not right next door, but on the same river. This one's on the south side of Asheville. It's about 20 miles from the Auto Camp property that was in the news. That's on the north side of Asheville. Excuse me, I have that backwards. Asheville River Cabins is on the north side, and I think Auto Camp. No, excuse me, sorry. Asheville River Cabins on the south side. Auto Camp is on the north side.
Either way, Asheville's booming with brands wanting to get into the market.
So, French Broad River coming up in the news must be a cool location. I've never been. I've been to Asheville. Definitely got to get down to that market and check these places out. So they are, looks like it's a more of a, it's interesting. It looks like a pretty diverse approach because the Zion Wildflower Resort is mostly canvas tents, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, safari style accommodations. Asheville River Cabins is obviously mostly cabins, and then the lodge, that website is not up yet, and that's under development. They're calling it a rainforest lodge, and exclusive access to jungle trails, hidden waterfalls, wildlife. So no insight yet into type of lodging unit, but I think that's interesting. And I like that approach, right? I think there's an argument for kind of the homogenous, like pick your lane in terms of lodging units. We see that a lot, right? Postcard cabins, every unit's basically the same. They've diversified a little bit they've tried some tents. Auto camp, they've diversified into some tiny homes and I think some tents maybe, but they're known, right, for obviously the
Airstreams.
And Under Canvas, who we've got a story on in a few minutes, is obviously known for canvas tents. So I think it's interesting to kind of diversify the lodging unit approach. I think it's smart. I think certain locations lend themselves to certain types of units. We've seen that where moist environments are not friendly to canvas tents and makes operating a lot harder. So I'm excited to follow along here.
And I think
different
as
kind of brand, right? Best Western.
That's what I was going to touch on was it's
Right.
the branding and loyalty side. Like it's interesting that not only is it coming downstream, right? Like we're out of the Hilton, Marriott, Hyatt only. Other hotel brands in large. Best Western is a large name brand. Everybody knows it. They have at least planted their stake in the ground saying we're not going to let this outdoor hospitality thing go by us. Skift has put out multiple reports on that hotel loyalty continues to rise in terms of the memberships and all of that, the loyalty programs. Something like it's been like a 60 to 70% boom over the last few years in those type of memberships. And Matt, as you touched on from the KOA report in the opening here, even if campgrounds and glamping only, I say only in quotes, represents a 20 to 30% share of the market, why wouldn't hotel brands want to get that extra 20 to 30% out of all of these customers who have loyalty programs with their brands? And then, as you said, it's an easier pipeline to bring somebody, both ways. You can go from a hotel into a tent or a cabin and back the other way. And it's just new and interesting experiences with this shift in consumer base where people are checking off that more Instagrammable moment box and, oh, I'm going to go stay in a cool tent in Honduras and all of that kind of thing. But then when I'm on a business trip, I might just stay at a regular Best Western in a hotel room for the night, and I'm still capturing that consumer every step of their travel journey. So I think that part of it is incredibly interesting. And this is the type of way that, with a loyalty program, like, consumers want to feel recognized. They want to feel like you're providing experiences that meet the types of things that they're looking for. This is the way to do it, is through that experiential, incredibly interesting outdoor hospitality type of experience. That's how you make a brand like Best Western cool again, is you add stuff like this into the pot. So I think it's incredibly interesting. I like that Best Western has, again, planted their flag. More competition in this space is only going to sharpen the products and make it better. It'd be interesting to see if like what other big glamping brand would be left for like a Best Western or somebody else, maybe like a Wyndham or somebody like that who's going to maybe come into this. Like, I don't know that there is many, right? We've covered the, Auto Camp and Under Canvas, like the iconic brands I think have already kind of latched up to an iconic hotel brand. So it's always, they're kind of making their own experience through this, which I think is also kind of unique and kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's a nice segue into the Under Canvas story here. They opened their first, is it their first California resort?
I think so.
And so 10 minutes from the west entrance of Yosemite, 71 safari tents. Looks like, that'll be a year-round operation, heated interiors, private bathrooms, stargazer tents, obviously some nice stargazing there. I think Modern Campground reported that it's certified as California's first dark sky approved resort, which I was surprised to read that.
Especially in California with all the
it's operating April 16th to October 26th. So that'll just be a seasonal operation, and congrats to them. I mean, that's a phenomenal location. 10 minutes from the west entrance. Can't beat that in terms of location.
Yeah, no, it's incredible, and I like that. As we've touched on, like out west is, when I think of Under Canvas, like this is that type of iconic location that I think is going to make a really big splash for them, and really easy to get people that are, familiar with the Under Canvas brand out west to just, this is one of those, again, bucket list type, Instagrammable, like I'm going to go stay in a cool Under Canvas tent and go visit Yosemite. Like what an amazing, trip and vacation that is, and incredible for them to capture that.
Yeah, well said.
Okay, so hotels check, data check. We're on to kind of the second half of this thing. We're going to touch on some acquisitions news. And Matt, I feel like this is a little bit of a gift to you. We're going to the Northeast finally after a couple of weeks of, I had some Midwest news that we had there with some acquisitions. It's not often you see some big, stories or news coming out of the Northeast. So I'm going to touch on both of these briefly and just set the stage. And then I'm just going to open the floor and let you go at it and talk about these. So first, I'll start with some acquisitions news from Northgate Resorts. Obviously, a brand based right here in Grand Rapids that everybody in the industry knows well. They recently announced here last week that they acquired Martha's Vineyard's only campground, which I think, number one, incredibly cool that Martha's Vineyard has a campground to begin with. I bet you most people probably might not have known that if you weren't from the Northeast or from that area. You probably wouldn't have thought about that. But it's called Martha's Vineyard Family Campground. Really looks like, just from the photos and preparing for this, like incredibly cool, really close to the ferry terminal. Right about that 200 site mark in terms of campsites and cabins and things like that. And just a really, cool acquisition. I think obviously it's hard to replace space on Martha's Vineyard, and for Northgate to get, you kind of have that built-in moat and that asset that's there. And I think that is, just incredibly cool and exciting for them. And then the second piece that, again, I'll touch on briefly here before we go back to that. There was a story in Woodall's this week about a New Hampshire park owner and a corporate buyout interest that we'll talk about after that. But Matt, why don't you take this away and touch on this for a moment?
Yeah, always love going back to New England because I'm from there. Always will be a New Englander. And this one is actually, I've never been there. I've been to Martha's Vineyard. I've never been to this campground. But I do have a family member who has a tradition of camping here every summer with his pop-up camper. He's actually in central New York, makes the trek out, drives, gets his pop-up camper and his truck on the ferry. It's a whole experience. Love hearing his stories and talking to him about that.
And man, yeah, to take a pop up on a ferry, like what an incredibly cool way to start the vacation. Like that is
this is like classic family campground. Like you are going back decades in time, and it's Martha's Vineyard. You're on an island in Massachusetts. You're close to the beach. You've got the quaint little town of Martha's Vineyard at your fingertips, all the cool little villages and towns around the island that you can visit. And, it's wooded. It's like that classic New England coastal kind of sandy forest. Just a awesome, awesome camping experience. And we've talked a lot about, it's actually my wife's uncle. He knows I'm in the campground business, and we've talked a lot about, what do you think that is worth? Will it sell? Will it remain a campground? Will it get developed? Will it, I think it's like 30 or 50 acres, which is quite a parcel in a place like Martha's Vineyard. So when I saw this news, I was encouraged to see that it would remain a campground. And we've talked a lot about Northgate, big fans of theirs. I think they are like one of the best case studies to really study in our industry. Privately owned, fantastic reputation, vertically integrated through Northgate Holdings and Campspot and all the different layers they have going, family business, really, develop their own brand and Camp Fimfo, really great relationship with operators through the industry, obviously,
Jellystone, Margaritaville.
Yep. And do they have KOAs too or no?
No KOAs as of note. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they, as you said, play in all the lanes. It's like Jellystone, Margaritaville, independent brands, third-party management, everything in-house.
Technology,
it's incredible.
Development, really prolific developers. I've seen a little bit firsthand in the Catskills. They have a property there, and there's always this stigma of big corporate national owner coming into town, and I can say that they show up at the town meetings. They have high-level representatives there. They really, they get into it, and they become part of the community. I've seen that. People have mixed feelings about kind of that whole, dynamic of a non-local coming in and developing property and taking, buying local businesses and having an opinion that they're not local anymore. I think there's nuance there, obviously. So really cool case study. I'd love to know what they paid for it. I could not find that. I wonder if, I would imagine there's some value add here with probably adding some lodging units and maybe upgrading.
Yeah, look like they had a lot of rustic camping cabins, the traditional type that you'd find in a KOA or most parks, right?
Yeah.
As you said, that
rustic campground, yeah. And so I would imagine to fit in with their brand and their business model. There's going to be some upgrades there, but I would imagine, as always, they'll do it tastefully and in conjunction with the community. So excited to follow along there. And then we jump over to
I was going to say, speaking of corporate interest in buying of properties, this next story ties in great to that.
Yeah, this is an interesting story from Woodall's. Got some interesting quotes from a couple owners in New Hampshire that state, which I totally believe, is that right, they get multiple weekly calls and have for years from investor buyers, corporate buyers trying to drum up interest and strike a deal and try and find that off-market deal that we're all chasing. And it's funny, a couple weeks ago in the newsletter I wrote about how we've seen that really kind of single-handedly there's a particular kind of influencer in the industry that has created bird dogs, right? Wholesalers, bird dogs, cold callers that are hunting for deals are not actually real end buyers for the most part, right? They're hunting to put a deal under contract and flip the contract and make a quick fee and never own the property. And wholesalers are great. Like, a professional wholesaler is a great resource. You should network with them. If you're doing it honestly, it's something to try, right? If you don't have the resources to buy a campground or buy real estate, it's really like a real estate strategy. I've done a little bit of it myself, but was always careful to represent exactly what my intentions were. Not everyone does that. And so it's had a real effect on the industry because it's such a niche little industry, right? There's only so many campgrounds in New Hampshire. So if you're hunting for campgrounds in New Hampshire, you call through your list, you're going to call all those campgrounds in about a week. You're going to know all those people. They're going to remember you. And even if you want to call the whole country, right, you can get through that in a couple months, and then you've talked to every campground owner in the country. And it's not like buying small apartment buildings where there's thousands in every region, and you can get forgotten as that cold caller and kind of stub your toe a few times. And if you're new, and I wrote in the newsletter that this is not like newbie shaming at all, right? I think anybody who knows me, I hope, would recognize that I'm more than happy to share any little bit of knowledge I've obtained over the last 5 years in this industry or in the 10 years prior in commercial real estate, right? I'm an open book. I am happy to share everything I've learned, without really asking for anything in return. And I'm big on that. And so this isn't the opposite of that, right? It's, if you want to get
our
started,
job is the education and the resource.
If you want to get started, reach out. Find me on LinkedIn. We'll set up a call. We'll talk. If you've got questions about what it's like to own a campground, buy a campground, underwrite a campground, I'm an open book. And I'm not the definitive expert by any means either, and I'll tell you that off the bat. All that said, what's going on here is not good for the industry, right? We have sellers that think they are sitting on a pile of gold. Some of them are. Some of them own things like Martha's Vineyard Family Campground that is one of one and is in a premier location, and you'll get the likes of Northgate Resorts to come buy it from you. But that's one of one. And there's just been this buzz, and it's an old story now. It's been years and years since the beginning of COVID, but it's still there, right? You go on the internet, and it's how to become rich buying one single RV park, and it's just such a farce. It's not real, and it's this lesson of don't even buy it, just wholesale it to some other guy that'll buy it or some other gal that'll buy it. Make your 10 grand, make your 100 grand, whatever it is that you think you can make in a fee. And it creates, right? One of the things that blows my mind when I kind of zoom out and think about it is, at Unhitched, I help manage our Facebook group, which I'm a huge fan of that Facebook group for what it is and the mission and everything. There's almost 40,000 members. and I manage
The
the
approvals and the
admissions.
posting, right?
And right, so like there's a little interview and it says like where are you interested in buying a park? Like what's your buy box? And how many people say I'll buy any park of any size, of any type, anywhere in the country? Thousands of people have answered those questions. And that's just like, that's not reality, right? If you don't have a nice little buy box and you don't recognize that buying a 10 site campground in like West Texas that makes $68,000 a year, there's just there's no reason to do that, right? Unless you're going to live there and run it, or it's affordable housing and you're,
Yeah, it's kind of like the duplex strategy of like I'm going to live in
right,
the
like
one
you're
half and
happy to
rent the
make
other.
10 grand a year on a
Right.
real estate investment and you're never going to think about it and you're going to spend 20 minutes a quarter on it, checking in with the manager and you're happy to make 10 grand a year. But that's not who is going after these. These are people that fancy themselves as aggregators or they're going to start with wholesaling and then they're going to build this portfolio and like go do it. More power to you. Maybe you're, a lot smarter than me. You probably are. But like I just don't believe in that just from having struggled myself in the industry and having probably got into it with precisely the wrong attitude and thinking of it as a real estate investment when it's not. It's a highly operationally and capital intensive, operating business investment. And
Well, and it's relational. It's not transactional, right? And I think so
100%,
so
yes.
much as we've gotten back to the like that it is just solely a real estate transaction rather
Yeah,
than, as you just said, like all the other stuff at play.
right. And that's what I try to counteract it at every opportunity I can, right? It just comes even up in conversations at work of like, oh, property management, oh, real estate. Like, I'm like, use the language that you want to use, but I don't use that language because I think it sets the wrong precedent. It sets the wrong expectation that this is not that far off from operating an apartment building when it's the polar opposite, right? So I think we went on a little bit of a tangent. I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but it's something that I come across all the time that
Yeah, I mean, look,
gets me a
we
little bit
we
fired
we
up.
bought this, 3 to 4 years ago. I still get calls all the time as a GM, and I'm like, yeah, you missed the punch. Like the new guy who came in and bought it already bought it. Like
Yeah, right.
we're
Yeah,
not
we'll sell
looking
it to
to,
you for 10 million.
yeah, exactly. Sure, if you want that number, absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it happens, and people are still looking, even in campground rich states like Michigan. Michigan's like one of the top 4 or 5, most campgrounds in the country, which is crazy to think about, but yeah, it's very much out there. It very much is seeped into the body politic where it's become normal, and I don't think that that's is necessarily a good thing, especially when you look at what has already been bought and consolidated and what's left with either the relationships you need to make with people like Unhitched and Grayson and Northgate and anybody else that you might be trading parks with in the future, or just those relationships that you have to make with the mom and pop owners that have the parks that are left in the market where you're going to get that deal. So very much relational. It's back to, this is, we touched on obviously AI in our last episode. I think this is where the relational piece of this becomes incredibly important. And it is that relationship that you're going to build with that seller or those brokers in that given market that are going to hopefully give you that advantage, not having an army of cold callers that's going to, do your bidding and you're going to get some deals back. I think over the long term, it's going to hurt the relationship and probably not going to work out for the better.
Right. Yeah, well said.
So with that, not to go into more what I would say is interesting news, but I think we'll end this with some RV industry news. And
Yeah.
honestly, we don't cover the RV industry that often, at least in large scale format like this. But I think this has been like, oh my gosh, such a large story that has just kind of shattered the RV industry this week in an announcement I think most people did not see coming. And we'll touch on some data pieces here. I'm obviously teasing an acquisition that was announced here that we'll discuss, and like, what does this mean for not only the RV space, but how this might potentially trickle back down to outdoor hospitality. So with that, it was announced on RV Business that Lippert Industries, LCI, and Patrick Industries put out intentions for a merger this week. I think it was billed as a merger of equals. Now, if for anybody unfamiliar with the RV industry, both Lippert and Patrick are RV component manufacturers. Both also participate in the marine space, and have several other kind of lines. Both brands work with all of the large RV manufacturers. So Thor, Winnebago, Jayco, Forest River, like you name it, the components that are in almost every RV that's nationwide come from one of these two brands. I think it's something like 90% plus of all major components are from either Lippert or Patrick.
Yeah.
So the talk of them merging together, kind of crazy. That obviously they are ruthless competitors, fighting for market share. And with some of the data that we're seeing, so obviously we've touched on RVIA data, February report, not so hot again, right about 14.8% down. We're year over year down 14.1%, both in if we take January and February data, looking at 26 over 25, that's been not so great. There's news that we saw, Matt, about Camping World not doing so hot again with the revenue that's coming out of their financial reports. And then we see an announcement like this with Patrick and LCI looking at the potential of a merger. So one, what do you think this tells us about the state of the RV industry? And two, could this have any trickle down effect to less campers potentially coming into the market? Is the wholesale and retail activity slowing? Again, what does this tell us, and what potential downstream effects could this have?
Really good question. So, we want to reiterate that obviously that's just an announcement of
Intentions to merge,
yeah,
not that they've
discussions.
merged.
Right. So, I always find that interesting that it's sometimes it's a negotiation tactic, sometimes it's leverage, right? If one party is kind of the initiating party, and
I did see
they're
both companies did eventually put out
yes,
press releases, so
yeah,
but both have confirmed it. I mean, yeah,
yeah,
who knows which side is the more dominant factor here?
yeah,
I
yeah,
I
yeah.
would guess probably Lippert if I had to put I'm solely speculating, but if I had to speculate, that would be my vote.
Right. I think Lippert among RVers is perhaps maybe more of like approaching a household brand.
Yeah.
Um, at least in my mind, a little bit more brand recognition. Actually, I was surprised to read that Patrick Industries has the higher market cap,
Hmm.
and more. They're similar size, right? Approximately 3 billion market cap for Lippert, 3.5 billion for Patrick, 190, almost 200 facilities for Patrick, and maybe about 150 for Lippert. So like very similar size companies, but Patrick a little bit bigger in terms of facilities and market cap. But I would say Lippert, in my mind, a little bit more brand recognition.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if this happens, it'll be pretty much a monopoly in the space, which will be interesting. See if there's any pushback on that from kind of regulatory governance stuff. That's what the expensive lawyers are for, though, and just really interesting. I don't know that it changes a ton for the consumer. Honestly, I would imagine it's probably better for the consumer. More resources, stronger position for the manufacturer. Maybe it's kind of a game.
Aftermarket components is where I am like, man, like the consolidation of that might be hurt the consumer in the long term.
Yeah, right, because they have all control. If it is truly a monopoly, then they kind of have all control. They can
Well,
dictate
and
price.
I just wonder too, like the FCC, are they going to let this get by? I mean, I just don't know. Like even if both brands come to terms, I'm struggling to see
Yeah,
how
it's a
it's
hurdle
going to
for sure.
get through, or what might need to be sold off, right? And what might then have an impact on how RVs are being built. I don't know. It just is such massive news that I don't think almost anybody ever saw that this was coming. That'd be like announcing that, like Thor and Winnebago were merging. Like it would just be such seismic news that um it's hard to kind of, anytime there's something that big, it's hard to kind of fathom that moment is here.
Right.
And this is the
Yeah.
hidden piece, right? As we've talked supply chains, and obviously the building of RVs becoming maybe a little bit more expensive, or obviously just the the size of the units and the way that the units are being built has changed. Everything's getting much, bigger, right? I had a Brinkley at the property for the first time not too long ago. Like these larger, more luxury
Yeah.
fifth wheels, and the coolness of some of these overlanding and off-roading and truck
Yeah.
campers, and like it's all changing, the way that RVs are being built, the way they're being sold, what customers are buying them. And this goes right along with it. This is the hidden piece of every RV that's built, contains Lippert or Patrick components. So it's going to impact, if this goes through, the way that RVs are built moving forward. So I don't know. I always look to, when companies, and Matt, maybe you can speak on this more than I can, but I always look to, okay, if they're announcing M&A activity, that probably means there's a slowdown in their business, right? Where you're not looking at like another brand or like market expansion through organic sales growth. So like, where can you grow? Well, we'll just buy another component manufacturer, right? And
Yeah.
like, is that better for the consumer though, or the industry? It might be better for Lippert, or it might be better for Patrick, but is it better for the
Yeah.
RVer?
It's
I
it's
think
a
is the
fair
ultimate
question.
question.
Yeah.
So
I
I don't
don't
know
have
if this
any
speaks
insight.
to slowdown or what, but it'll be interesting, as obviously the retail registration data has not been great. And obviously that's the type of components that are going in those units that dealers are buying. So that you can kind of see the trickle down effect back to Lippert and Patrick through that.
Right. So yeah, and that's through modern campground. We saw um, some kind of analytical reporting from a couple different analysts in the industry, from KeyBank and Truist, put out some pricing guidance and some kind of adjusted ratings on Patrick. So they were priced at $155, and that went down to $140 according to KeyBank analyst. And they cited directly what you said, the softer RV shipments and retail data through February of this year. So that's the context we have to go off of. No,
But that's
no
it's a
actual.
trailing one, right? Like that's
Yeah.
from February. We don't have March, right? We're now into April, almost May. So it's hard to get a sense of like what's actually happening and brewing. And
Right.
and honestly, we don't know what led to this conversation of the meeting of the minds between Jason Lippard and the folks over at Patrick to try and put something like this together. Who knows? It
Right.
could have just been
So
the right
yeah.
time. I mean, but yeah, just super interesting. We had to cover this, as far as this is like one of the biggest pieces of RV industry news in quite a long time.
Yeah. And then they also touched on Camping World as well, which
Yes.
stock dipped a little bit there. At least the truest analyst cut the pricing there. Really interesting, noting that February revenues were down 20% year over year. And that's after January was almost 11% decline year over year. And they kept a buy rating on these stocks, but also
Change the pricing
cited,
target.
yeah, they just both cited just trouble in the retail RV market. But interesting that Camping World still posted 2025 adjusted EBITDA up up 35%, which is not a small number.
Hmm.
I think they've been a little bit of a roller coaster over there. I think you talk to any RVers and it's like a love-hate relationship with Camping World. Right? A lot of times it's talking about monopolies. It's like it's the only option, right? It's like Walmart in these rural markets, that you might find a mom and pop repair shop that has some parts in a tiny little store, but if you need something today and you need some selection, right? Sometimes your option is Camping World if they've got it in stock, or buy it online from Camping World, or buy it online from Walmart or Amazon and wait 2 days. So, um, it looks like revenue down, EBITDA up, which is always an interesting
Huh.
thing to try to analyze. I don't have any insight into why that is, but a little bit of a head scratcher
And change in
there.
leadership, right? With
Yes. Yeah,
CEO
good point.
Marcus Lemonis out, and the CEO, what is it, Jason Wagner, I think, or Warner.
Yeah, which that was kind of a expected succession, I think,
Correct, but it'll
there.
be interesting to see how he shepherds the next, like, okay, if we're going through this period, will there be any difference in strategy from how things were done previous? I think that's an
Right.
interesting. Obviously, everybody in leadership positions in RV companies is having to weather this right now, especially with, gas prices and consumer demand and just what's happening in the world and geopolitics. It's a interesting time to be making long-term business decisions and forecasting what the future is going to look like. So.
Yeah, well said.
All right. With that, we'll leave it on the crystal ball moment and leave you to figure out maybe where things go from here. Because Matt and I
Let us know.
do not have all the answers. We'll invite you on as a guest. You can take one of our
Yeah.
seats if you've got the answers. Come tell us, and you can fill in. But in the meantime, share this episode with somebody who might find this valuable. We touched on a lot of topics today, so I think there will be something for everybody in here. A lot of data-rich conversations, some great acquisitions news, and then talking about the RV industry as well. So a lot of good detail to dive into here as we're heading into May, and we'll be right in the thick of real true camping season where we're heading into peak demand here in a relatively short order. So with that, we'll see everybody back here next week for more. Matt, thanks.
Thanks, Alex.